Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing Bigfoot stories. Let's get into it. Story 1, 2011. Two friends and I had traveled to the Huachuca Mountains of Cochise County, Arizona for some hiking and camping. We were limited on where we could go that year due to extensive wildfires. Having been blocked from going up Carr Canyon, we drove further down to Miller Canyon, where we were able to get off the beaten path and a bit of sleep. The three of us slept in a small dome tent that we pitched about 20 yards off the road. We did not see another car up on that road where we were that night. I awoke in the middle of the night to my friend sitting up in his sleeping bag yelling. The ceiling of our tent was mesh, and we could look up through it and see the night sky. When his yelling awoke me, I asked him what was going on. He told me that he just saw Bigfoot. I kind of smiled, but I could see the grave look on his face. I again spoke to him about his experience recently, January 2013, and he explained his experience thus. Dude, I saw it. I know what I saw and I still remember it. I wasn't dreaming. It's just as vivid as when it happened. I looked up through the tent and I saw its face looking at me. The moon was bright and behind where it was standing, making it hard to distinguish facial features. I could see a perfect silhouette. Its head was pretty long and it didn't really have a neck. Its head seemed to just merge with its shoulders. It was big, at least 8 feet. It was standing over the tent like it was leaning forward and looking through the moon roof of the netting. I could see what looked like whites of its eyes. We stared at each other for at least 30 seconds before it was gone. When the Sasquatch moved away, my friend yelled in fright. We did not attempt to leave the tent or go in pursuit of it. I have 100% trust in this friend. We joke around quite often, but I can attest that he is not joking with this. I believe his account to be authentic. I myself have been hiking in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah and had a distinct impression, almost tangible, that I was being observed. The feeling caused me to stop and look around, but I saw nothing. The feeling persisted, so I started to sing while I walked. I've been alone in the woods before, but this feeling was unique. I was bushwhacking through an aspen grove around Mount Timpanogos at the time, which I am now aware of has been something of a hot spot for sightings in Utah. I have since learned that this feeling of being watched is a common phenomenon that often precedes sightings. If I had known this then, I would have been more vigilant. Story 2, November 2007. There's some strange things going on about the place I own out here in Prescott, Yavapai County, Arizona. We have the remnants of what used to be a working ranch from years ago, some livestock left from those days. A few horses, a few Brahma, a couple of goats out there, and a longhorn I won in a bar fight in Mexia down in Limestone County, Texas. And recently, we think we have a Bigfoot around. We used to winter horses for people around these parts who were snowbirds, but no more because of the mystery disappearances that happen here. In fact, lots of mysterious things like that happen around the place, especially as fall nears and the weather cools like September, October, November. Nothing happens in summer out here. One notable incident was the disappearance of one of my best dogs, part pit bull shepherd mix. He wasn't afraid of anything, was a great watchdog for the lower pasture. He guarded the grazing stock and 2 sheep we used to have and the goats from the local mountain lions and bobcats. Now you may say that the dog wandered off, but he was 10 years old and never left sight of the main house. He was a devoted dog. Some have said a bear came in from the forest at night and took him, but my middle son found him exactly 14 feet up in the crotch of a pinyon pine tree with his neck snapped. No teeth marks found on him, no bear claw marks, no mountain lion tears, just a broken neck and tossed up into that tree. Or if not tossed, someone must have put the dog's body up that pinyon, which my son had trouble reaching. We all tried to explain that one. Now onto the sheep. I bartered with a half Indian man for a ram and a ewe and had them down in the grazing pasture along with the stock, horses, goats, and such. We only had them a short while and they disappeared. For a while we thought the previous owner snuck back here loading up the 2 and carried them off, but my wife ran into the fellow in the hardware store in town and talked to him about the disappearance. He came home that day with my wife, and together we went out looking for a sign. We found nothing that day, and I don't believe he had anything to do with the sheep disappearance. He told me a far-out story that got me thinking, though. which is why I looked up Bigfoot on the internet. Anyway, he told me of a place up in the Sierra Prieta Ponderosa forest where this Yavapai Indian woman ran her small flock of sheep in the company of her young cousin, a blue Merle Cooley, and a border collie that kept her flock together at night, fending off attacks by mountain lions and bobcats, sometimes wolverines. This one season, the woman and her cousin were bringing the flock down off a mountain grazing. It was late October, and snows were expected. She said she was not feeling well and laid down in a grassy meadow to rest, but woke up when she heard the sheep bleating, her cousin yelling, and the dogs loudly onto something, the woman sheep herder said. She got to her feet in time to see her two dogs biting at the heels of a big, hairy man, Soyoko, as he ambled off, escaping with a big U under his arm. The hairy man tried to fend off the biting dogs, kicking the one coolie dog all to hell. This might be what befell my dog. She called off the dogs and watched the hairy man disappear into the pine trees with his prize. He explained the hairy man to her was what we call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. She only told the story once to an elder, and she won't speak of it anymore, but he mentioned they come down from the north in winter. Hearing the sheep herder story, putting two and two together, my sons, the half-Indian, and I pretty much decided that we must have a rogue Bigfoot living somewhere near the property. I don't mind that so much, and we don't mind sharing some of the fruit off our trees with him, but stealing a man's stock is another thing. I don't expect to put up with that. After reading up on some websites, my boys and I, along with other dogs, packed a rifle in the scabbard and rode out recently one morning during Thanksgiving week and covered the whole western stretch of the property line looking for a sign. You would laugh. We looked like a posse in a B-Western. We worked the edge of the tree line for about 2 hours looking for a trail. We found one that led into the deep forest, a section none of us had ridden before. We worked the horses through there, into and around thick brush. Soon we came to a stream and stopped to gather our bearings and water the horses. Dismounting, I thought I heard someone cough. I asked, and nobody heard it but me. My horse jerked up, snorted, and became uneasy. Sensing something none of us could see, the other mounts followed. All of us were focusing on keeping the horses under control as they danced about, bucking, kicking, and snorting. My sons thought, mountain lion? I wasn't sure. We stood together there by the stream listening, calming the horses when the dogs started looking towards the thicket of tangled brush. Then the barking started in earnest and they took off. Still we couldn't see anything, but by now we all expected the dogs to tree a mountain lion. We couldn't follow, the brush was too thick, but the dog noise seemed to end about 20 yards into this thick brush and brambles. We kept calling and calling. Finally the dogs returned, and then took off again. Pretty soon the dogs returned with tongues hanging out, breathing heavily. We leashed the dogs and took them and led the horses back down to the stream. The dogs settled down some, but the horses didn't, and as we were making an effort to saddle up again, that is when it happened. There was this howl that lengthened into a scream that at first sounded like a Brahma fart, low, guttural, and drug out, ending up in a high-pitched drone like a woman screaming bloody murder. My body reacted with chills and goosebumps, mainly because the scream was coming from very close, somewhere in that thicket, the brambles, where the dogs had been. The scream was long and kind of dragged out, the kind of noise that gets your attention real fast. The half-Indian yelled, "Soyoko," Bigfoot, as he pulled the rifle out of his scabbard. By now, the horses were almost impossible to control. Then it got quiet. Not a sound. No birds, no crickets, no nothing. Everything was very still except for the horses. The dogs were by now cowering between my legs, their ears pricked toward the thicket. Then, in the distance, we heard another scream. It must have come from across the next valley. We were figuring there's about to be 2 of these Bigfoot, and I felt fear for the first time. The dogs started whining. My grown boys hurriedly saddled up. We followed and took off down the trail, heading at a full gallop all the way. Never heard nothing like that vocalization before, and I've heard plenty of coyote, plenty of wolves and elks bugle, but never nothing like that before. And it wasn't a mountain lion scream. It was 4 times as powerful. If that was a warning from Bigfoot, we got the message. Story 3. It was July of 1967. Myself and two very good friends were on an all-night bass fishing excursion on a strip mine pit just west of Farmington, Illinois. The fishing was bad because of intense rain that came and went as the evening wore on. Around 11 p.m., I was standing next to one of the two friends when I heard a sound coming from down the gravel road that went by the lake. The sound was coming from quite a distance at first. I thought it was a katydid, but I was surprised at the volume. I realized it was not an insect sound, but something much larger. As the sound drew closer, the volume increased to the point where my friend, who was fishing in the same location as me, stopped reeling his line in and asked, "What is that?" I told him I didn't know, but I noticed that it was getting louder and sounded like it was coming towards us. The sound got louder and louder and was actually very irritating to the ears. Our other friend finally hollered at us and told us to knock it off. We told him it wasn't us making the noise, and we stopped fishing and walked over to where he was standing. By this time, the noise was excruciatingly loud, and the frogs and insects had stopped croaking and singing. Suddenly, there was a sound of a very large body jumping into the shallow water slough next to the lake where we were fishing. Whatever it was that jumped into the water began making deep, booming sounds on the water by lifting its feet clear of the water and then crashing them back in flat-footed. We just stood there in the pitch blackness and listened until the creature came out of the water on our side and started making its way through the 8-foot tall reeds between us and him. I walked a few feet away from my friends and towards the sound it was making, walking through the reeds, and stopped on a footpath that went around that end of the lake and stood there as the creature stepped almost all the way through the reeds. I remember looking up at something that towered over me, but was just a black mass in a mass of tan-colored reeds. I didn't smell anything or see anything clearly, but whatever it was stopped and stood there as though it was looking at me. Instantly, I took off in a dead run around the lake towards a house on the other side of the lake to see if I can get some help for us. When I got to the back porch of the house, I heard a couple more splashes and saw by the dim porch light that my two friends had jumped in the water, and one of them had drawn his knife and was hollering for me to get back over here. This thing was standing just a few feet away. I took off running, and when I got to the other side in 20 seconds or so, the creature had backed off and was now in the reeds again. It jumped back in the water and got back out and approached us again. This time the three of us hid underneath an overturned John boat that was lying on the bank. The creature stomped around the boat, and I got the knife from my friend and prepared to stab at any fingers that attempted to lift the boat off us. But the creature just went back to the slough and jumped back in. It walked up and down the slough for the rest of the night, screaming that sound until the sun was about ready to come up, at which time it went back down the gravel road in the direction it had come from and gradually out of hearing. I've heard recording sounds of allegedly made by Sasquatch or Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest on other internet sites, and the sound this creature made was very similar, especially considering the intense volume. Our encounter with this creature lasted for at least 5 hours, and I will never forget it and the terrorizing effect it had on me and my friends. This account is true to my best recollection of an event that occurred over 43 years ago, but it seems like it happened just last week. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.